Okay, hi, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Bob Reyes of the Mozilla Philippines community. So this is the Mozilla Philippines online meetup for January 2022. So the very first meetup that we have for this year. So just some housekeeping rules. So if you don't want your face to be recorded, please do not turn on your camera. Okay, so as we had said and reminded you all, that a recording will be uploaded to our social media accounts later after this online meetup. If you have questions to our guest, you may use the chat box here in Zoom, or if you want to ask them personally later, just let me know. And yeah, once acknowledged, you may unmute yourself. Okay. So we have a special guest tonight, Mr. Richard Nilagan of AWS, to talk about getting started with WebAssembly. But before that, so I'll go with my spiel first. So we are the Mozilla Philippines community, and we had been in the Philippines for quite some time, since 2009. That's our official reckoning. And what do we do here? In the Philippines, we make ourselves busy for localization of Firefox to Tagalog, Cebuano, and Hiligaynon. So if you speak any of those languages and you would wish to be part of the localization efforts here in the Philippines, later there's a sign-up form that I will tell you. So we are also advocating free and open source software, online security and privacy through social media, online events, participating in lawmaking procedures, and many more. We are also building a learning management system that will be populated with contents related to localization, privacy, web development, and Rust programming. A little bit of history. We started as Netscape, and then from Netscape, it evolved to what we know now as Mozilla. So Mozilla operates as a global nonprofit. So not many people know that we are actually a global nonprofit. And as a nonprofit organization, we have a mission. Our mission can be summarized into three. One, we want to build a better internet. Next, we want to ensure that the internet will remain as a global public resource that is open and accessible to all. And lastly, we want to have an internet that will truly put people first so that individuals like you and me can shape our own experiences and we feel empowered, safe, and independent while being online. And to do that, we have products that we let people know that they have a choice when going online. So this is the Firefox family of products. So we have the browser. Mozilla is best known for Firefox. So whenever we talk about Mozilla, people will associate it with Firefox. And when we talk about Firefox, many people will eventually thought of it as the same as Mozilla. So the organization is Mozilla. The primary product that we have is the Firefox web browser. So we also have Firefox Monitor. So what is it? It's a website that you may check if your email address has been part of any publicly disclosed vulnerability or breaches. Okay, so the three Firefox that you see here below, those are the different flavors of Firefox. So we have Firefox Developer, Nightly, and Beta. Okay, so if you want to experiment and check the future versions of future features of Firefox, you may want to try them out. We also have Firefox for mobile, so both for Android and iOS. So we even have a specifically built Firefox for that is focusing on privacy. So that's why we called it Firefox Focus. So this is the current version of Firefox on the desktop. It's 96.03. And lastly, we have a free service called Firefox Relay. So this is an email relay service. So if you do not want websites or web services to know your real email address, but wish to sign up for their services, you may want to generate relay email addresses, give it to them, and still receive the email messages that they will send to you. If you no longer want to use it, you simply have to delete the relay email, and this is a free service by Mozilla. Thank you to MozillaPH friends, particularly to upper.ph. They are hosting our Zoom Pro account for the entire year. Maraming salamat to our friends at upper.ph. And yeah, how to join the Mozilla Philippines community. So just sign up. Go to join.mozillaph.org. It's just an online form. Basically, we will add you if you want to our mailing list. We need to have people from different parts of the community to use and test our products, to spread the word about free and open source software and online privacy. And we want to have people who are willing to learn, to be trained in helping other people become web literate and awesome online. These are our social media accounts. So we are on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and on Instagram. And okay, the email address is info@mozillaphilippines.org. If you want to chat with us, just go to chat.mozilla.org. Search for the Mozilla Philippines room. So actually, you can find many rooms there. If you want to talk to our developers, feel free. So just go to chat.mozilla.org. And now I will hand over the virtual stage to Rafi Kasumbing to talk about education.ph and Siklab Pilipinas. Go, Rafi.
Thanks, Bob. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mozilla's first virtual meetup. And we'd like to thank the MozillaPH community for giving us a chance to partner with them for this meetup. So I'll be sharing my screen. All right. So again, I'm representing the Education and AWS Siklab Pilipinas. So a little bit about us as Education. So we are the largest edtech platform in the Philippines. We hope to empower millions of Gen Z students aged between 13 to 24. Of course, if you are older or younger, you can also still use our platform so that you are aware of your education decisions. You are able to build a fulfilling career and life. So we work with partner schools, corporations, foundations, so that they may reach you and you may reach them as well. That is education.ph. And in terms of the community, specifically AWS Community Works or AWS Siklab Pilipinas, AWS Web Service, Amazon Web Service, AWS Siklab Pilipinas. Our hope here is to bring people to uplift fellow developers, professionals in the Philippines. So in the different industries, Filipino industries, we want to make it smaller, right? With partnerships with Mozilla and other partners, sharing thought leadership. So basically bringing people, product, and purpose together. Right. So it's a growing community. Again, we really want to thank all our partners so far. And we also have a weekly series as well that happens every Thursday, 6 p.m. So also check that out as well. So a short sample of what we've been doing. I'm Rafael Kisumbing.
I'm Grace.
Representing the R users group of the Philippines.
I'm the CEO and founder of Filter.
Very excited to share AWS UG BuildHurst Plus. I'm a volunteer and co-organizer. Very important that you have the knowledge of what's the culture that you really want to put in place.
For us, it's really about finding really great, world-class digital and e-commerce talent. The Philippines has been a very good place to be.
Technology is actually a great equalizer. The community's inspiration is that, there's a safe space.
The fact that you joined, that's already a big step.
Having the platform of a very clear vision and values and a mission of the business and empowering people to make decisions.
This will not be the only episode that you will see. We will have a lot more. I'd also like to thank our co-presenter, AWS and AWS Siklab. Right. And of course, again, the idea here that we're trying to bring is there's a lot of resources out there, speakers, thought leaders, and we really want to make sure that you are aware of all of these opportunities.
From achieving your business goals to advancing your career, building your cloud skills can make every day a new opportunity for success. That's where AWS Virtual Classroom Training can help.
Highly available environment.
We bring live online classes to you so you can keep up with the pace of innovation and learn in-demand AWS cloud skills wherever you are. Engage with peers and AWS accredited instructors.
We'll have traffic coming into our private subnet.
Gain insights as complex topics are broken down in real time through hands-on labs, demonstrations, whiteboarding, and presentations. Get your questions answered and learn best practices that can be used right away. Every AWS training classroom course is offered virtually. Choose a public class delivered by AWS or an APN training partner that's convenient for you. Or schedule a private engagement with a dedicated AWS instructor to develop your team.
Thank you very much.
Go from learning to doing and keep on innovating with virtual classroom training straight from the source, AWS.
Right. And again, you'll see me and some of my other core team members as well. So you might know Rose or Acha, and they may have you. And feel free, of course, to also communicate directly to us as well or reach out to us. Right. So again, to reiterate, our goal is to reach at least 10,000 developers and programmers to upskill or develop them further to become world-class. We are already world-class. Sometimes it's just the discovery of them as well. So we also aim to support at least 100 tech community-driven events, such as this one, with speakers and topics for any upskilling activities. Okay, and how do we do that? Again, we identify skills and knowledge gaps within the community. We look for speakers. We work together with co-organizers, such as Mozilla, and again, present those topics, especially now that we are on the cloud, where a lot of us are remote, and cloud really is an enabler for remote. Okay. So further activities that we have in February alone, we have at least 7. So Thursdays is always reserved for 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. But we also partner with Ministry of Testing, the Philippine.net group, and React.js Philippines as well. So to know more, you can also scan this QR code, as well as simply follow us later in our social media. So far, the feedback has been great from last year, just operating 1 quarter, the host, topics, the events, getting that consistency is very good. And of course, people are excited to attend our future events as well. Okay, so again, our ask really is just join us in the community, contribute, and let us work for more tech events together this year. Okay, so thank you, and thank you so much, and connect with us. This is our platform.
Okay, maraming salamat, Rafi. So that's Rafi of Education.ph and AWS Siklab, Pilipinas. Okay, so do you have questions ba for Rafi before we let him go? Anyone? Kung nahiya kayo, you can use the chat box of Zoom. So if you have questions related to AWS Club or Education.ph, or kung talaga nahiya ka, Rafi, if Rafi is still here, pwede mo siya i-chat diretso sa there. So he gave his email address in the chat box. Maraming salamat. Okay? So now, okay. So let's continue, okay? So for our main agenda tonight, we are privileged enough to have a prototyping engineer from Amazon Web Services ASEAN. So he's not new to the community, pero to some, this may be the first time that you will see him online, okay? Pero in the Philippine tech community, he's not new, okay? So I will let him introduce himself. Okay, so without further ado, let's all welcome Mr. Richard Neil Ilagan, or popularly known as Carding, to the Philippine tech community. Kamusta, Carding?
Thanks, Bob. Okay naman. Thank you.
Oh, sige. You'll have the virtual floor.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, Mozilla Philippines. Tama si Bob. I've been up and around with the local technology communities back in the Philippines. But I think this is my first time speaking in Mozilla Philippines, right?
Yes, the very first time.
Oh, nice, cool. All right. Really, really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So let me just set up my screen. Kasi last time na nag-talk ako, I was talking for like 5, 10 minutes as hindi pa pala ako nakashare na screen. So let me just make sure that I do that correctly this time.
There, yeah, we can see it now.
There.
Cool.
Perfect. Cool. All right. Nice. All right. So today, sabi nga ni Bob, I'm going to be talking to you about WebAssembly. So I'm really, really excited whenever I get to talk about emerging tech. And WebAssembly, I think, is one of those things that has a huge potential. Like it's an up and coming technology. It's I wouldn't say it's in its infancy, but it's very, very far from maturing. So it's just getting its bearings, and a lot of people can already see the potential that we can get with WebAssembly. So hopefully I can share a lot of those with you today. So my name is Richard Nilagan. Most people just call me Carding. So I don't know if you've seen me before or I've talked with you before, but in any case, feel free to if you see me anywhere, feel free to chat me up. I like to think I'm a friendly guy. I'm a prototyping engineer for Amazon Web Services. So what I generally do in AWS is I like to think of it as experiments. So we have like business problems, technology problems. My job, my responsibility is figure out the best or one of the best approaches to solve that problem. Like, paano ka gagawa ng ganito? Paano ka gagawa ng ganito technology-wise? What is the best way to do it? And so on and so forth. So we run a lot of experiments. We work with a lot of emerging technologies. We work with a lot of new tech. And WebAssembly just happens to be one of my more favorite ones. So I'm really excited to be sharing that with you today. As a prototyping engineer, we kind of work pretty much across the board. So we do web development, we do mobile development, we do systems, we do IoT, we do machine learning, and so on and so forth. Pero I like to think of myself as specializing really as a web developer. So I've been in the industry siguro maybe around 15 years na. And so when I saw this image back in a few days ago in Twitter, I knew I just had to share it. So Wesbo shared this over Twitter, and this showed a lot of the technologies that we've worked with before in web development. And I'm sure some of you in the chat would probably recognize one or two, or maybe 5, 10, 20 of those. And I realized now, in all of those years that I've been working, building stuff for the web, all of these things you see here, I hardly use any of those anymore. Like it just, the technology just keeps on chugging along. The technology just keeps on churning along, right? New technology gets born every day, every week, every month, right? So ano na naman yung WebAssembly? What is WebAssembly? What's all the fuss about? Like, why is it important? What is the benefit that brings to the table, right? I have to admit, na being, a self-admitted web developer, a web app specialist like myself, I've been scared to take a look at WebAssembly for the past few years. Particularly because whenever I hear of WebAssembly, this is what I think of. Like parang assembly. I have to work with C, C++, maybe even, very, very low tech, very, very low level kind of technologies. I'm not even a computer science graduate. So how do I even get started? So for the longest time, I've been putting off actually trying to learn about WebAssembly. Pero in the past few months, I decided to give a go at it. And I really like what I was seeing. So at least for today's talk, this is the thesis. Okay, so I have about a little less than an hour to talk to you guys. What I'd like to share with you today is that, number one, WebAssembly is not just exciting. It does not just have great potential, but it is also one of the biggest and most most significant pieces of new technology that is maturing currently right now. One of the more important pieces of emerging tech. I also want to show you that it's not at all scary. At the very least, it's not as intimidating as I initially thought. and that it's simple to get started with. Na, ano naman siya? It's not, it doesn't have a huge learning curve. It's very, very easy, very, very quick. Probably in your first 15 minutes, I can give you like, your first getting your feet wet kind of thing, right? So hopefully at the end of the session, we'll touch on all of those things. Hopefully you feel the same way, right? If you have questions throughout the presentation, I'd like to, just keep a note of it. I'll make sure we have enough time for your Q&A at the end of the session, especially since this is being recorded. So let's just put it towards the end para tuloy-tuloy tayo, and then we can just, compile everything together right at the end of it. Cool. All right. So let me just get started with the definition for WebAssembly. So, sabi ng mga kaibigan ko, I am very notorious for being very, very technical when I talk. So, the definition for WebAssembly is this. So I just swiped this from I think the Wikipedia page for WebAssembly, right? So, or their official website for WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is essentially a binary instruction format for a stack-based virtual machine. I am not going to pretend na naintindihan natin yan because I definitely didn't. The first time I read about WebAssembly, diba, natatakot ako and all that. When I first started getting with WebAssembly, read this definition, I didn't know what it meant. Yeah, virtual machine, yeah, stack, okay, but what? But why, right? So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So hopefully, that's what I'm going to be trying to demystify for everyone today. So, tapan muna natin yan. Let's put it to the side. Let me put this definition instead forward. Okay, so WebAssembly lets you use virtually any programming language for the web. Yun lang. Just, let's keep it within that same context. May footnote dyan, I am definitely oversimplifying that. So it's, that's kind of, very, very simple. That's not everything WebAssembly, pero right now, yan na lang muna. Then let's piece it along. Okay? Like I said kanina, WebAssembly is very, very exciting. It lets you run any programming language for the web, right? So that alone sounds very, very powerful. And whoops. Yep. So that alone is very, very powerful, right? So I was actually looking through a lot of references, and I think the best kind of reflection of how important that is. I got this from a podcast by Changelog, episode 294. So Lynn Clark, she's this senior principal engineer from Fastly, and she does codecartoons.com if you haven't seen her. Mentioned na yung WebAssembly specification, the WebAssembly standard, was first introduced in 2015. In 2017, just 2 years later, all of the major browsers already had it. Right? All of the big browsers already supported WebAssembly. That's just 2 years. If you're a web developer, if you're a web engineer, if you've built web applications before, you probably know that that's very, very fast in comparison with a lot of other web technologies, right? Just how fast did CSS3 get standardized, for example? Just how fast did ECMAScript 6 get standardized? And so on and so forth. Right? All of the web technologies that we have right now. It takes a long time to kind of standardize a lot of those. Pero WebAssembly, just 2 years, right? So I think that's a very, very good reflection of just how focused a lot of people are in getting this shipped and getting this available to browsers and, end users and so on and so forth, right? Pero don't take my word for it. What I'm gonna do is I'll take a few minutes to show you just how you can work with WebAssembly. Give you a bit of a taste, right? So sabi ko nga, WebAssembly, it lets you use virtually any programming language for the web. So what I'm gonna do, I'm showing you my terminal, so you should be seeing my terminal. What I'm gonna be doing is, number one, I'll build a WebAssembly module, very, very easy, very, very quick. Tapos I will embed that in a web page, and then I'll show you that we can use it, right? I will build my WebAssembly module, my WASM module, using Rust. So I'm also starting to learn Rust. Happy to see that Mozilla is really liking Rust, by the way. I love the language so far. So let's try that, right? So Rust has this tool called WASM-pack. So let's try that. WASM-pack, I think the command is new. Let's call this MozillaPH WASM. So what happened is that I created a directory. Ang laman lang yan is pretty much your standard Rust. So if you've worked with Rust before, this is just pretty standard. You have your cargo, TOML, which is pretty much your package JSON. If you're a Node guy, your requirements.txt, if you're a Python person, right? And so on and so forth. So you have your cargo, TOML, nothing very, very special about that. Meron lang mga dependencies and all that. And then you have your file there, yung librs, and that's really your entry point for the file. Cool. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I'll open that file up in Visual Studio Code. This is it. Give you an example of what it does, right? I'll just delete all of the stuff that doesn't matter. So everything that's above here is pretty much required. So ang gagawin lang natin, we'll define. So remember, this is Rust, right? This is not JavaScript. This is not a web tech. We'll define a function that lets us add two numbers. Pretty hello world-ish, no? So in Rust, this is how I do it. A public function add. Let's call I a U32 and a U32. Let's return a U32. So we get an X, a Y, add that together. That's your function, right? So far so good. For my WebAssembly module to work, I need to expose this. I need to export this function para magamit ko siya sa JavaScript, right? So the way to do that, at least in Rust, is i-decorate ko yung function with this macro right there called WASM bindgen. So yun lang yun, right? So other than that, nothing different. This is exactly how you code any other Rust program. Kumbaga, it's just normal Rust, nothing special, right? Let's try building that. So back here, let me just check, cargo check. Let me see if I can compile it. Okay, I have a few warnings, pero let's try to compile, right? WASM-pack, build. I want to target the web. Release. So, ibig sabihin release, production build lang. So I will just build it. So as you can see, WebAssembly is compiled, right? So we'll talk more about that in a bit. Pero this is how you generally work with WebAssembly, no matter what language you're using. I'm just happen to be using Rust. So ngayon, ang mangyayari, I now have my WebAssembly modules in this directory right here called package. Yan ang laman, right? So as you can see, I have a WebAssembly file there. Some perks of the framework I'm using. Meron na siyang package JSON if I want to publish this as an NPM or a Node.js package. Meron na akong JavaScript there. I have type definitions if I'm using TypeScript and so on and so forth, right? Pero those are not important. Ang important is meron tayong WebAssembly module right there. So as you can see, this is actually a binary file kasi we compiled it. Right? So far, so good. So what happened is that we got Rust, we built Rust, we used Rust to build a WebAssembly module. Step 2, let's bring that into a web page. Cool? Okay, so I'll close this muna. So remember, ito yung same project kanina. What I'm gonna be doing is maglalagay lang ako ng index.html. So, like I said, very, very hello world-ish, huh? I have snippet there. Yan lang yung HTML5 boilerplate if you're familiar. And this is just like any other web page. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll serve that. Okay, localhost, itabi ko lang to. Pop. Then I'll give you a browser. Pop. Localhost, right? There we go. So that's my hello world right there. So alam natin na gumagana yung web page. What I'm going to be doing is I'll bring in some JavaScript. Konti na lang, matatapos tayo. So I'll bring in some JavaScript, app.js, just like with any other JavaScript, diba? So we will just put in a script, app.js there, right? Tapos, just like any other JavaScript, let's create our onReady handler. Hello world, there we go. Document, oops, content loaded, onReady, right? Nothing special, right? So I'll show you what that looks like. Dito lang tayo sa, well, there, the console. So if I reload this, there we go. So normal JavaScript file lang, right? Let's work on paano mo dadalhin yung WebAssembly dito. How can you actually use your WebAssembly file here? So easy peasy, actually. So for all the major browsers na ngayon that supports WebAssembly, they already have API bindings that lets you use WebAssembly very, very readily. So right now you have very, very good support for WebAssembly. So what I'm going to be showing you is very, kind of the from scratch way of doing it. Pero depende sa ginagamit mong framework, there may be an easier way to do it. Like for example, yung pinapakita ko kanina ng WASM pack sa Rust, there's actually an easier way to do it. But I'll show you the from scratch para lang, everybody can see what's happening, right? So, step number 1, kailangan mong kunin yung WebAssembly module. We can do that by a fetch, right? Nothing special. So, anong pangalan ng natin? WASM natin? MozillaPH, WASM, BG, WASM, right? So, yan lang yung ano. So, we fetch the WASM module. I'll show you that that's happening here. There we go. So, lumalabas sa network, sa network tab ko that I'm actually getting yung WASM module. So, I'm getting an HTTP 200, which is good. Now, once I have the WASM module, I need to compile it, instantiate it into the browser. So the way I can do that is, whoops, let's call this compiled na lang. Sabi ko nga, lahat ng major browsers that support WebAssembly have the APIs to do this, right? So the way to do this is just WebAssembly, instantiate streaming, ibigay mo lang yung WASM mo sa taas, and generate an import object. So the import object natin is just empty because it's a very, very simple WASM. So once we have compiled, let's try logging that out para makita niyo. And there we go. Nasa page na natin yung WebAssembly module right there. So when you ito lang yung kailangan mong gawin actually. Itong dalawa lang. So once you fetch yung WebAssembly module, and then once you instantiate it using the browser API, then you now have a working WebAssembly module inside your JavaScript. So from here, you can then access yung functions, yung pre-program natin sa Rust kanina, yung ginawa natin kanina, we just created an add function, right? So what we can do is we can get yung instance nung kinompile natin, see that? Yung instance sa ating console, right? So let's get that. So what we can do is we have an x, let's say 10, const, a y, let's say 20. Then our sum natin is instance, exports, add. Let's try adding x and y. Kasi const log natin yan. Oops. Yep. So far so good. So if everything works correctly, we should, boom. See that right there? So that's how you can use WebAssembly. That's not running in JavaScript. Tumatakbo lang sa JavaScript yung mismong yung pag-prepare. Pero yung mismong pagbangga ng dalawang number, That's happening in WebAssembly via Rust kasi yun yung ginawa natin dito kanina. See what's happening? So that's the basic kind of way you can bring or use WebAssembly into your web page. You just have to, if once you have a WebAssembly module, you just have to fetch it, and then you just have to instantiate it or compile it back down to the browser. And then you can use it just like, any other JavaScript object. Katulad ng ganyan, right? So imagine if we're not using Rust, if we're using something else, C, C++, Python, Go, C#, and so on and so forth, right? So that's pretty much what you can do with pretty much what you can do with WebAssembly, right? So cool. All right. Yun yung thesis natin. We can use virtually any language to run in the browser. Pero how does that work? All right. So let's kind of break it down bit by bit. So you probably already know na meron tayong browser environment, right? So we already have a browser environment. This is exactly where your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS runs, right? Nothing too special about that. We have the document object model, the browser DOM, right? Now, what's special about WebAssembly is that for the browsers that support WebAssembly, meron siya sa loob na virtual machine. There's a WebAssembly virtual machine inside, embedded in it. So what you can do in those browsers is that you can bring a WebAssembly module, which is your WASM file we created earlier, right? We can bring it into the VM, and then it can run inside the virtual machine. Once it's running, it can then interact inside and outside. So pwede siyang tumawag palabas, pwede siyang magtawag ng functions papasok. So if you have like JavaScript functions na gusto mong gamitin ng WebAssembly mo, you can also do that, right? But the other half of the magic is itong WebAssembly module na nasa loob. Like I said, you can use virtually any programming language to create the WebAssembly module inside. So you can use what? C, C++, Go, Rust, maybe even Python, maybe even JavaScript para gumawa ng WebAssembly module that runs in the browser, right? So all you have to do is compile it into a WebAssembly module. So if you think back to yung definition kanina of WebAssembly, ang WebAssembly actually is this. Not really the WebAssembly module, not really the .wasm, pero the virtual machine inside the browser. So WebAssembly is a standard way, it's an open standard for how WASM files should run. You can think of it that way, right? So as long as you have a WASM VM, you can bring in any WASM module and it will run in a very deterministic fashion. So there's an open standard with how those should run, kumbaga, right? And then you can use it, just like how you can use any other web tech like WebRTC or WebGL and so on and so forth, right? JavaScript and so on and so forth, right? So that's really how it works. Now, if you break that open, if you think about that, there's really a few things na I'd say are very, very significant benefits with how all of this works. If you think about, okay, gumagana siya, how does it work? What can it offer you, right? There's a few things that I think are very, very significant, very, very important, very, very critical. Number one is, like I keep saying, you can use more languages in a standardized manner, right? This might not feel very, very important. Kasi especially if you're a web dev and you're specializing in web development, if you think about it, if you only know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? If you only know that, okay lang. You can make most any web application you can, right? You can go knock yourself out and build the spiffiest web application you want. Pero if you're coming from a different discipline, you're a sysadmin, you're an API dev, you're a systems architect, you're a backend developer, right? You're not a front-end engineer, and you want to build a web app. It's not so easy, diba? Kasi coming from the perspective of a web developer, like I am, if I know JavaScript, that that brings me to a lot of places. I can build web apps because of Node.js. I can build backend apps. I can build mobile apps because of stuff like React Native, diba? But if you're coming from the other end of the spectrum, if you're a backend developer wanting to build for the web, it's not so easy because of something like WebAssembly, because of what it allows you to do. You can use a lot more things. You can use a lot more languages, a lot more frameworks, a lot more systemic products. You can use more disciplines to influence the web. So if you only know Rust, if you only know Go, if you only know C++, then easy. You can still use that to build something for the web now, right? And that's also very important because the context of what the web is now, that's very agnostic na. Hindi na lang siya pang browser. We have stuff like Electron, which lets you build web apps, quote unquote, onto more platforms, right? So it's not really just for the browser, right? So having more, let's say, breadth of options for what you can do on the web, that's a good thing all throughout, right? And you can see it, you can see it when you look at WebAssembly. Kasi itong list na to, I got it from this morning. So I updated the list this morning. These are some examples of languages that can either already compile to WebAssembly or have runtimes that can run in WebAssembly. So that's a huge thing. You have the option of using all of these languages on the web, right? So that's a very, very big thing. For stuff like yung pinakita ko pala kanina, Rust, you can compile to WebAssembly. C, you can compile to WebAssembly. Stuff like Python, you cannot pero you do have options to run Python on the web using WebAssembly. So for example, I think I have one here. Oh, here we go. For example, this. Whoops. For example, this is a Python runtime. There we go. I can run Python right here on the browser. Dahil yung Python runtime ko, it's actually a WebAssembly module. So I'm not running Python directly as a WebAssembly module, pero it's one foot in the door. If I can run, Python here, right? Plus bar, right? Ganon. If I can run Python here, then it's just a matter of time until we can actually use Python directly on the browser context, right? And not just that, we have stuff like I was actually looking at this project. I can play Doom. Oops. I can play Doom on in the browser because the original C++ code for Doom was compiled as a WebAssembly module. So I can actually play Doom inside my browser. It's not going to be as fast as a normal Doom, pero the possibilities are endless. I have stuff like Ffmpeg. If you're not familiar, Ffmpeg is a transcoder for audio and video files. So dati, it's something you use on your terminal, you use on your desktop, but now you have a version that can run right on the browser, directly on the browser. Kasi we can compile it to WebAssembly, right? Those are really, really nice things. Just having all of those, just having all of those options to us, just having all of those languages to us. Which brings me to my next point, kasi we have all of those languages, right? We have all of those kumbaga options for now. What can we use to build on the web? Pero that's the thing. WebAssembly is not just for the web. I mean, the name is WebAssembly. It's WebAssembly, pero it's not just for the web. It's called WebAssembly kasi nagsimula siya as something for the web, pero it's grown to be something more than that. You can actually run WebAssembly on more platforms. If you remember kanina, how WebAssembly works, meron ka lang virtual machine, di ba? So as long as you have that virtual machine, right, you can pretty much run WebAssembly. So in theory, we have a browser, meron tayong virtual machine sa kanya that runs WebAssembly. What happens if we take away take out that virtual machine and put it on a different platform, a PC, a Mac, a Raspberry Pi, an Arduino, a PlayStation, a Nintendo Switch, right? Still the same thing. So that as long as you can take the WebAssembly virtual machine, put it on a different platform, then you can run WebAssembly deterministically. And this is exactly the kind of offering that we already have with a number of different services. Like for example, WASMer. So what WASMer does is using WebAssembly, you can run pretty much any of their supporting programming languages on any of their other supporting languages. So you can run, for example, you can run Ruby inside your Go, or you can run maybe Elixir inside your C#, and so on and so forth, right? So you can kind of mix and match because WebAssembly is an open standard that you can, bring anywhere. It's not just for the browsers, right? So this is very, very powerful because not only do you have a lot of these languages, you also now have all of these platforms. So you can bring WebAssembly to virtually any platform, like say, run it on top of one of these things, right? This is a Raspberry Pi. And then that same WebAssembly module I built kanina for the browser, I can expect it to run exactly the same on the Raspberry Pi. Kasi it's still WebAssembly, right? It's a different platform, pero WebAssembly is a standard. It will run the same way. So if you don't know Solomon, right there, I'm showing on the screen, Solomon is one of the creators of Docker. So ang sinasabi niya na kung meron lang WebAssembly before, back when they created Docker, they wouldn't have needed to create Docker. Kasi yun eh. It's he thinks it's a more powerful version of it or a more modular version of it or something. Pero it's pretty much, it solves a lot of the same problems. It's not the exact same solution, but it also solves the same problems. How can you run one piece of code on multiple different platforms, right? And the nice thing is, this is not all theory. We are actually seeing this happen in real life. Like a lot of different companies are doing this already, na maraming different platforms, just WebAssembly. Like for example, 2 days ago, Amazon published how they're updating the Amazon Prime Video app. They're migrating everything to WebAssembly. So yung mga Prime Video apps that you see on mobile phones, on smart TVs, on streaming sticks, yung mga USB streaming sticks, right? Maybe different platforms, desktops, PCs, MacBooks, and so on and so forth. All of those are migrating to WebAssembly because it allows them to just build one module and target all of those, right? So ang sabi nga doon sa article, the Prime Video app targets more than 8,000 different device types. If you didn't have a technology like this, how do you even manage the engineering to handle all of that, right? So what happens is that you build one WebAssembly module and it will run exactly the same on all of those 8,000 different device types. And we not only see them running okay, we actually see significant improvements, right? So WebAssembly runs faster than yung dati nilang ginagawa with JavaScript, or it's using less memory, or the modules are actually smaller, and so on and so forth, right? So you actually see a lot of these improvements because of a very significant thing. And number 3, I think this is a benefit, but it's also kind of a disadvantage, to be honest. WebAssembly is compiled, right? So it's not interpreted like JavaScript is. JavaScript is interpreted, Python is interpreted, right? So because it's compiled, the first benefit you really get out of that is that mas maliliit yung mga package because it's binary, it's bytes, right? It's not lexical, it's not language, kumbaga. So when you're transferring WebAssembly across the wire, it's much, much smaller than your typical JavaScript bundle. Yung ginawa natin na WebAssembly kanina, if you can see here, it's actually just 201 bytes. Maliit yung WebAssembly natin kanina. Granted, it's just, it's just an add function. Pero still, the point stands. Mas maliit yung mga WebAssembly modules because they're compiled. And not just that, because they're compiled, they tend to run faster. Bakit? Kasi if you think about at least in theory, compiled versus interpreted, by the very nature of that, mas mabilis lang yung compiled. Bakit? The way I kind of think about this is, isipin mo na lang, kunwari nanonood ka ng isang telenovela, nanonood ka ng isang TV series na in a foreign language, right? Paano mo naiintindihan yung pinapanood mo? You can do it via, siguro may hard subs, or tinatagalize, right? Or merong nag-interpret, nagsa-sign language sa tabi, right? So if you think about it like tinatagalize, binabago yung audio, that's kind of like compiling. So parang yung original language, binibake na into something that's immediately digestible. That's immediately something that the machine can understand. Yung programming language mo, translate na into something the machine understands. So diretso na siyang nagtatrabaho. Unlike when it's interpreted, nagsasalita yung pinapanood mo, tapos may nag-i-interpret, right? Tapos saka mo naiintindihan yung sinasabi niya, a little bit of a delay after. So that's kind of like, it's not a perfect analogy, but that's kind of the way I think about compiled and interpreted. So naturally, for a lot of different use cases, compiled would just be faster because of the way it works, right? Definitely JavaScript can still be faster because there's, I'm definitely oversimplifying a lot of things there. Pero definitely, compiled versus interpreted, generally mas mabilis yung compiled, right? I'm glossing over a lot of things there, pero that's just how I think about the things. So as kind of an example, I created this app. You can see the URL there. You can actually visit that right now if you'd like. So you can see I tried to benchmark the different ways you can do SHA-256 hashing on a browser. So you have vanilla JavaScript, just pure JavaScript, right? Then I have a WASM module. I have a WebAssembly module I built that does the same thing. And then I have the native browser APIs that uses subtle crypto. What the web app does, if you look at that on your browser, is it does 250,000 calculations of SHA-256. Thus, it gives you the times it took. It's very, very naive, but it gives you an idea of how fast WebAssembly can be when compared to your other options, right? So that web app is right there for you to see if you'd like. So feel free to play around with it. So those are really some of the things that I think are very, very significant when you're looking at WebAssembly. I'd like to finish off this talk with some final things you might want to know with WebAssembly lang, right? So remember, this is a constantly maturing tech. We're not quite there yet in a lot of things. We are making a lot of good progress with it though. So some final things you may want to take a note of. WebAssembly is a sandbox environment. It's a nice thing. Na sandbox siya. Like it's a virtual machine. It's completely secluded from its environment, right? But that also means na since it's sandboxed, kumbaga nakakahon siya in something, right? It cannot directly talk to its environment. So kumbaga, one of the shortcomings of WebAssembly right now is it cannot access the browser DOM, right? So if you're running WebAssembly on a browser, you cannot directly ask Rust to create an HTML element somewhere. Like for example, I want to create a div, put that there. You cannot do that in WebAssembly just yet. Kailangan mong dumaan through an API. So at least in the browser, that API is JavaScript. So if you want your WebAssembly to be able to create stuff or access the DOM, you actually need to prepare stuff in JavaScript that you need to bring into the WebAssembly. It's a bit complicated, but that's how it works. WebAssembly does not have direct access to its environment. You need to go through an API. So if your environment is the browser, so if you're running WebAssembly in the browser, you need to prepare JavaScript so that the WebAssembly can talk to the browser. Kumbaga. If you're running WebAssembly on other devices, like our Raspberry Pi, there's this project called WASM that is meant to be a standard API for WebAssembly to access the systems. Like for example, if you want WebAssembly to access the file system, ano yung mga files na meron ako, di ba? It can't do that on its own. It needs to talk to a API. So that API will be WASM. So that's also an ongoing project right now. Secondly, WebAssembly has it's human readable, kind of. Like sabi ko kanina, it's binary. Pero one of the things that makes it nice is you can actually translate WebAssembly to a human readable format. We call it WebAssembly text format or .wat. Itong .wat na to. So for example, itong code na to, it compiles to this WASM. You can actually translate it to something readable like that. So yan talaga ang kumbaga yung ini-standardize ng WebAssembly, that kind of format. So whenever we ask a language, Rust, for example, to compile to WebAssembly, they have to follow something like this. Yun yung parang ano niya, like parang instruction set. To show you what I mean, for example, ito yung WASM natin kanina, di ba? If I translate yung ginawa natin kanina to WATC, so we can actually get any WebAssembly binary, then translate that to human readable format. So if you want to debug something like WebAssembly, you can do that. It's very complicated kasi this is a bit like reading assembly. It's not quite assembly, pero very, very similar to it. So that's where the assembly part comes from. Pero it's nice to know that you can do that, right? So just keep that in mind. If you have a WebAssembly binary, WASM, you can translate that to text format. Ganito. So yun yung ginagamit ng mga browsers when they compile it back in the browser. I also created a demo, like a more practical demo. So ang more like paano ka gagamit ng WebAssembly if you're creating something like a React app, right? How do you do like CI/CD? Paano ko nang gumagawa ng continuous deployment, right? So how do you set up a project like a normal React project, that uses WebAssembly in your, if you and your companies want to use WebAssembly tomorrow or on Monday, right? Paano nyo set up yung project nyo? How do you set up your build? How do you set up your tests? How do you set up your CI/CD? How do you set up your deploys? I created this should be github.com. So I created a repository sa GitHub. So github.com, AWS samples, AWS Amplify WebAssembly. So give that a look. I tried my best to keep it, as demonstrative as possible. If you have pull requests or questions about it, feel free to add them in, or issues, feel free to add them in. Okay. So if you want to take a look at how you can practically start with WebAssembly, this is something I prepared for you. So give that a look. Lastly, syempre, I haven't talked a lot about AWS at all. If you're interested on getting started with anything under AWS, web tech, web app, web development, and anything at all, IoT, machine learning, we have a dedicated website for that. It's right there on that URL. So feel free to go there. We have tons of free learning content. Feel free to browse. If you just want to, learn something new, for example, feel free to explore. Okay. Thank you for your time. I hope everybody learned something from today. May na-pick up kayo that you can bring with you somewhere and use. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them now.
Cool. Maraming salamat, Carding. Okay, so very, very digestible presentation.
Yay.
Cool. I remember I was asked to present an introduction about WASM, I think 2-3 years ago for in front of college students. They had heard of it that time, but they're afraid to use it because of the thing na it's assembly. So
Exactly.
anything related to assembly ayaw ng students. And just a some sort of a history and trivia. We had heard of this internally at Mozilla something like 2015 kasi it actually started as an internal project called ASM.js. So meron kami dating ginagawang project with who's this guy? Unity, yung gumagawa ng mga games. So we
Oh,
want to
nice.
bring their games to the web browser without installing anything, and it is being done through ASM.js. And I think the other web browser manufacturers saw the potential, and they said that since it is an open source project, they want to be involved. And then a few years later, that's when WebAssembly came into what we know as WebAssembly now. So yung internally talaga ang tawag namin dati do sa some project is ASM.js. So but
Yeah, I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
yeah, so yun siya. So it's basically a subset of JavaScript. Kasi yung dating yung CEO namin dati, he's the guy who created JavaScript. So we run on JavaScript stuff. And Rust is somewhat something that was created by a Mozilla employee, si Graydon Hoare. So internal din bago naging open source project siya, and then later on community na yung humahawak. Hindi namin sinasabi now na it's handled by Mozilla, but we support Rust together with other companies and tech corporations. Okay? So guys,
I'm totally not surprised.
Kung may tanong kayo para kay Carding related to AWS, related to WebAssembly, now's the time. So, sige, may tanong si Rafi. Could be used to obfuscate your logic a bit versus using JavaScript.
Okay. So definitely, I think there are definite use cases where you can do without a lot of JavaScript. Like may mga nakikita na akong apps ngayon na completely WebAssembly na lang. If you plan to obfuscate your logic though with just WASM, I don't think that's totally possible because you can still get the binary, and once you get the binary, like I just demonstrated, you can translate that into yung WAT format, right? There are also some tools that actually try to decompile WASM to more readable code, right? So I wouldn't call it like an end all be all way to obfuscate code, to be honest. Ang total mantra ko nga dati is as long as it's on the web, as long as you're using it on the browser, consider it unsafe na. It's in unsafe hands. WebAssembly WebAssembly included.
Cool. Okay. So Jezreel has a question, pero yeah, let's see. How is AWS WebAssembly compared to other cloud providers? Is there any difference? Thanks. Okay. Sige, Carding.
Cool. So AWS has no service for WebAssembly, right? WebAssembly is an open web standard. So it's a technology just like CSS, HTML, JavaScript. It's an agnostic technology. AWS has no hold over it. That being said, we do have a lot of different services that you can use to host something that can run WebAssembly. So like web apps, for example. So definitely you can use AWS to run applications that use WebAssembly, but WebAssembly is not AWS.
Cool, awesome. Let's say if I'm on a free tier, can I make a web app out of the free tier AWS?
Oh, definitely, yeah. So for those that don't know, we have an AWS free tier. I personally think it's a very generous free tier. So there's a number of technologies there, S3, EC2, that you can use to host a web app. So if you're interested in running, for example, something with a server, like maybe Apache or Nginx, you can use the free tier to run EC2, for example. If you want to run a single page app or a static website, there's S3. You can do that. You can do that as well. So you can use the same technologies to host a web app that uses WebAssembly.
Okay, awesome. Any more questions for Carding before we let him go? we have the same time zone naman, ano?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for being part of the Mozilla Philippines community online meetup.
Oh, absolutely. It is absolutely my pleasure.
Okay. Going once. Any more questions before I tell something?
But in any case, in any case, kung may maisip kayo, just feel free to reach out sa mga links ko sa baba. You can always reach me there.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So kung wala nang questions, so ganito, AWS through Carding was generous enough to give us some AWS vouchers. So Jezreel will get one. I'll send the code to you via email. Si Rafi, kailangan pa ba ni Rafi na to? Hindi na. Okay. So Rafi is also the community lead for AWS User Group Philippines. Tama, no, Rafi?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So hindi ko na kailangan ng credits. Ibigay mo lang sa iba. At
Cool.
other
Sige.
attendees.
So ganito mangyayari. Since wala nang gusto magtanong, offline, we will raffle it off and then we'll announce. So lahat ng attendees ngayon will have a raffle slot. Okay? So we'll raffle it off offline and then we will send it to you via email. Okay? So we have 5 vouchers from Carding. So -1 will go to Jezreel because he asked a question. So since wala nang gusto magtanong ng question, so i-raffle na lang namin. We'll set a raffle later para sa to be supervised by the DTI reps of MozillaPH, no? Okay? So yon. So wala nang tanong para kay Carding. Going once, twice. Okay. So with that, maraming salamat Carding for being part of tonight's Mozilla Philippines Community Online Meetup and also to our attendees. Okay? So we hope that you learned something. Ako marami akong tutunan. I know the basics lang of WebAssembly pero using Rust and WebAssembly, I haven't tried it personally. I tried it with different languages before pero yun nga, one advantage of WebAssembly is that if you are a semi-dinosaur who knows different programming languages rather than the newer ones today, medyo edge mo pa rin yun magagamit mo pa rin siya if you will be applying it with WebAssembly. So yun, that's how cool it is. Okay? So maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. Any parting words, Carding?
I was just gonna say now, if you're looking for to learn a new language, I'm really loving Rust. It has some of the best developer documentation I've seen. So if you're looking to study a new language, Rust is something I recommend. You're essentially hitting two birds with one stone. You can learn, something for low-level systems, apps. You can learn something for the web.
Cool. Actually, internally, we are finalizing lang the calendar. For this year, we will definitely be having series of events related to Rust here for the Mozilla Philippines community.
Great to hear.
And believe it or not, yung maraming gumagamit ng Rust, wala sa Luzon.
Talaga? Nasa sila?
They're in Visayas, Mindanao.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And medyo mahirap maghanap ng Rust developers sa Pilipinas. Maraming gusto mag-hire. In demand siya, pero karamihan napapirate outside of the country. So, in demand yon. So, kung gusto nyo malaki sweldo, alam niyo na kung anong pag-aaralan nyo. Okay? So,
Okay.
yeah. Maraming salamat! Yeah, ingat kayong lahat and that concludes our session for this month. So, we will be sending follow-up emails and yun, for the raffle. So, konti lang naman tayong attendees. Okay? And minus yung mga leadership ng MozillaPH. And yun lang. Maraming salamat and ingat kayo. Nasaan man kayo ngayon. Maraming salamat, Carding and Rafi. Sa uulitin.
Maraming salamat din.
Okay? Bye-bye. Ingat kayong lahat. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.